During the panel discussion, the differences between the US and Europe became apparent. Being familiar with both regions, have you experienced that too?
I would say that the United States, despite Donald Trump, is in a slightly better position than Europe, only because it's politically more homogeneous and it's in an economically quite strong position still, has low unemployment. The central bank has more room to maneuver in contrast to the ECB, and it's still a dynamic economy. And so I think that Europe is actually facing more headwinds.
You're an international attorney, best-selling author, consultant, media contributor, CEO, and even more. What still inspires you most? And what do you personally consider your biggest achievement?
What inspires me most is my work with interesting people. I consider myself lucky to be working with some of the most interesting people in the world, people who were inspirations for my book, Uper-hubs, who make things happen to move things along. So who think ahead and most importantly, perhaps think out of the box, around corners, even if it's sometimes controversial, like my former boss, Nouriel Roubini, who predicted the 2008 crisis. And I think now we're nearing a new inflection point with the digital economy and so forth, a topic that I'm writing my next book about. So right now I talk to more people in Silicon Valley, people who are, tech pioneers. And so that's very inspiring. And my greatest achievement, perhaps, being entrepreneurial and having established my company BeyondGlobal and myself as a brand, because I think everybody in our sphere is pretty well educated and works very hard and so forth. And if you approach prospective clients or whoever from a big company with a big company behind you, if you can call and say, hello, I'm so-and-so and I'm calling from a big bank or a big, a corporate entity, it's much easier to get a foot in the door. It's much harder when you try out just on your own to be taken seriously and so forth. So that has taken a considerable amount of work, but eventually it has paid off, and I'm quite happy with it.
Okay. What advice would you give young women in the finance world, which is mainly dominated by men, and what obstacles did you personally have to overcome?
As we know, finance is still a man's world and positions of power are occupied by men. So I always say women need to become more proactive when it comes to networking, but it's hard because they can basically mostly network laterally and not upwards because there are natural limits to networking. As we've seen with the Me Too movement, men have a much easier time networking because they can go out with their bosses or more senior people after work. They can go out for a drink, they can hang out at their offices after hours, they can hang out with the doors closed. These are all things that are not either politically correct or they could be sensitive, they could give rise to gossip. And also senior male figures may be reluctant to network with women only because they're concerned that it may give rise to problems, even if they're, if it's completely innocent. So I think it's easier for men, it's harder for women. Therefore, women need to be more proactive. They need to try harder. And I'm always a little reluctant to give boilerplate advice because it very much depends on the firm, on your colleagues, on which area exactly it is. Is it a more progressive environment? Is it more conservative? But I think women need to prepare themselves for the fact that it's more difficult for them than for men. And then also the underlying problem is biases and societal assumptions, whether it's in the US or in Europe or Germany, they're very similar, that women need to keep on fighting against. Just as an example, there have been many sociological experiments. One of them was that, which I cite in my next book, people, men and women, were asked to picture a leader. And 95% of people, men and women, drew a male figure. That's, instinctively the first thing that they think of. And of course, that also means that they don't view women in positions of power so much, at least not naturally. It's not their first inclination. And I think that women generally have to work harder at being taken seriously. They need to fight a little harder than their male colleagues for respect. And that can be very frustrating. And that's why a lot of women decide to leave the financial world. But that's just the way it is. We can't change the world around us. I think the only thing that we can do is prepare ourselves and equip ourselves and try to be mentally and psychologically resilient to assert ourselves and fight against that.